Hello again, Steve here with a few comments about what I think of the PPC. For those of you who don't know, this is the People's Party of Canada. It's a new, I would say, nationalist, or yeah, probably a nationalist, populist, maybe that's the term. I know these are all just jargon terms by now, which are taken out of context very often. How about pro or freedom? Well, put it this way. Maxime Bernier, I saw him in an interview recently. He's the leader of that, and his favorite website is Mises.org. Well, that's pretty frickin' amazing. I don't think Justin Trudeau had ever heard of Mises.org, so that's pretty amazing. That is, he's a free market guy basically, and that is something to be like. As in the last video, I'll mention that here and hopefully throughout this little conversation. Anybody who's pointing in the right direction of more freedom, I'm in favor of, right? So Maxime Bernier, if I look at Justin Trudeau, or I look at whoever it is, Andrew Scheer or Jagmeet, whoever it is, over on the other side, on the other, leftist parties, and then I look at Maxime Bernier, I say, well, that's an improvement. That is a huge improvement in terms of individual liberty, right? So even though he's a statist, even though he's not an ANCAP or a libertarian, he is pointing in the direction of more freedom. Remember we talked about before how if we have the option between being owned by a really bad slave owner who beats us or whatever and doesn't feed us properly versus a slave owner who gives us a little bit more liberty, if that's the only, if it's a dichotomy like that, I know it's a false dichotomy, but if that's the only option I have, the choice is obvious what I'm going to take. So, and the idea that we're going to have a free society tomorrow is just is a pipe dream. Except in our own consciousness, we can always be free inside. We have freedom of thought and whatever, right? But amongst other human beings, this ain't going to happen anytime soon. So that direction is positive. At least it spares us a bit of time, maybe. Anyway, so you can see the attack dogs come out because there was a recent debate in Burnaby South, I believe, in near the Greater Vancouver area, and this is what's called a by-election. Here, the way the system works, I guess, is even if there's not a federal or provincial election going on, if for whatever reason a local riding, somebody dies or resigns or whatever it is, for whatever, there's probably various different criteria. There has to be like a mini election in that particular region take place. So my understanding is there's a by-election going on right now, and there's a recent debate, and it was put out, and there was a video posted, and I don't endorse this guy because I don't know who he is, but it's interesting. He's called the Forgotten Canadians. So looking, the Forgotten Canadians, it's called People's Party of Canada Kills and Debate in Burnaby, BC. That's the name of the YouTube video, and that's the name of the creator. I don't know who this guy is, but anyways, link in the description. I'll put that in there. I know he's snipped things out to focus heavily on this Terry. No, her name is Laura Lynn Taylor Thompson. To show how strong she is compared to the other people. There's four candidates: the NDP, the Liberals, and the Conservatives, and then there's the PPC, and she absolutely kills it. She's actually got content. She's got reason and evidence. She's got facts and figures and stuff. Nobody else has anything. I mean, there was questions like, what about free speech on the internet? What about fake news on the internet? The Liberal candidate, he thinks that the UN should regulate speech on the internet. And even in a very leftist place like BC, people are like, boo, the UN. So then he stops talking. The Conservative, of course, they try to walk such a middle line. He's got nothing at all. I mean, at least the Liberals, they admit to being just basically complete sellout globalists, right? The Conservatives are trying to play to everybody, so he's got no comment whatsoever. And the NDP, the new Democrat Party, the ultra left socialists, they think that we should just regulate the hell out of social media and everybody. And actually, only journalists should be allowed to talk, basically, right? And of course, this Laura Lynn, she mentions how one of his, regulated journalists basically recently did a smear campaign against her. Complete falsehoods, lies, one after the other. And she named him in person. It was somebody, the Burnaby Now, which is a local newspaper. She named the reporter who basically did a slanderous or a complete falsehood report on her. And of course, they're all talking about fake news, the other candidates, right? And of course, they're always talking about the internet and Facebook and all these other different platforms where little individuals like myself get to talk still. And they're all talking about regulating it. We have to regulate, we have to regulate, we have to regulate. And, this Laura Lynn woman says, well, we got bigger issues, and she makes a really good case. So I think that going forward in this next election, which is coming up this fall, I believe, the federal one, but also for local people in the local by-election, I think it's a good thing to watch because, BC tends to be pretty heavy-duty leftist. And if this Laura Lynn has a good showing, that's interesting. Now, fake news, because that came up a number of times in this discussion, in this debate, which you can check in the link in the description. Came up a number of times. And I watched, just after I watched that video, another video come up, which was a CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, interview of Maxime Bernier. And of course, the interviewer just kept going on and on and on. It's an old trope, right? They're trying to nail them on sexism, on abortion, and all these sorts of things. And Bernier's kept saying, well, it's not our issue. Education. Okay, she said something about education. Well, education's a provincial issue. We're a federal party. We have nothing to say about that. It's not our business to go into that. And she can have her opinion. Is anything she's saying illegal? He should have asked her. He should have turned the interview. So many people are not doing this. Turn the interview on the interviewers. They got nothing behind them. They're all scripted. So try that. Anyways, so a couple of times when they mentioned this Laura Lynn Tyler, what did they do? While the interviewer was talking about it, they flipped to a picture of Laura Lynn wearing a cowboy hat. Talk about fake news. Talk about neurolinguistic programming, or whatever you want to call it. This is propaganda, because what is the symbol of a cowboy hat to so many people these days? Guess. It's a symbol of redneck. And of course, the redneck has been painted with the brush of racist, bigot, homophobe, and what's the newest one? SOGI or something like that? Sexual orientation, gender identity. I mean, the lefts, they can't get rid of these, whatever you call them, these slogans, can they? So she's labeled as an anti-SOGI bigot. And apparently, there's fake news out there. But the fake news is in, this alt media somewhere. Meanwhile, it's these organizations, the Burnaby Nows and the Vancouver Suns and all these big organizations, who are labeling her as an anti-SOGI activist, who's running. And therefore, this party is a bunch of bigots. So watch for the strategy. It's becoming boringly predictable. And it all has to do with free speech. Okay? And this is what's important. If we want our civilization to survive, we want humanity to continue to grow, which it always has been since since life has come out of the swamps, right? We've continued to grow. But we can see in history, right, the real important characters who have launched humanity into the next round of growth, into the next sort of enlightened period, have been the philosophers and so on, who stood for free speech. And usually they ended up on the end of poles and pickets and crosses and all kinds of stuff. So, this next election, though, for one thing, if you're just interested in political theater, this is going to be amazing, because Maxime Bernier is no dummy, I don't think. And, my prediction is probably somewhere along the lines of a minority liberal government or a minority conservative government, with Maxime and his party holding the balance. So they're going to make a lot of difference in the long run. And it's interesting, too, how, the people on this stage, all of them, they were all, they call them minorities. There were people from other countries originally. There was an East Indian there. There was looked like a Chinese guy who was the conservative or liberal, and there was somebody else, I don't know. She was the only white person, and she was a woman. But, she you can see why she's so strong on what her beliefs are, because she came from Uganda. She was born in Uganda. She's an African, basically, right? She's the only African there, but she's white. But she was driven from her house as a child. Their house was burned. Many of the people they knew around them were killed by Idi Amin's butchering army. And she said, you know what? She came to a welcoming place, which is this place most people call Canada. And she says she's not going to let that happen again, you know. And the attacks that she's under are going to be horrendous, right? Think about it. She's white. She's a Christian. She stands for life, right? What's the opposite? People who stand for death. And anybody who's against free speech stands for death, because that's what civilization is. Civilization is founded upon free speech. And so let's support people who we may disagree with what they're saying, but let's give them the right to say it. This idea of thought crime is just unbelievable. Now, because, if all of this theater was actually just theater, it would actually be pretty hilarious. But it's not just theater, right? There's a lot at stake, so it's not really funny. And, sure, I'm no political activist in a way. Like, I'm not politically active in the actual sense. I don't vote, and I actually encourage people not to vote. However, I don't begrudge people who do. And I don't begrudge people who get involved. In fact, I know a guy that I know fairly well. He's formed his own party, and he's striving out there. And another guy that I know, he's running for a certain party, and he's very, very passionate about it. And he asked me if I'd sign his nomination paper. I said, well, I'm not politically active. I can't sign it. But I'll tell you what, if you're pointing in the direction of more freedom than other alternatives, you know what? I'm going to give you the thumbs up. Absolutely, I'm going to give you the thumbs up. And anybody who's shaking up the difference, all you got to do is look at that video. If you're objective and you see who's got the energy, who's pointing towards greater levels of individual freedom, right, is turning over our regulation to the UN. That's what the liberals are saying. And furthermore, okay, so one of the things that they're going to attack this Laura Lynn on a lot, is that she's pro-life, okay? Well, they call it anti-abortion. But, I mean, okay, so she's a Christian. Well, that she has to be, number one. Otherwise, she's a fake Christian. And what she says is that in that party, the People's Party of Canada, that's the only party that's open to that. I didn't know this, but she says, okay, on this panel, first of all, the NDP says he's pro-abortion, right? He's in favor of killing unborn babies. He admits to that. At least he's honest about it. The Liberal down at the end, he's in a party where you're not allowed to be anything but pro-abortion. So we know where he stands. And the Conservative is not allowed to talk about it because they're too afraid to talk about it. Well, at least in the People's Party of Canada, we have free speech. We're actually allowed to talk about it, and so far it's not illegal to talk about it. So if you're in favor of freedom and you're political, there really is no choice in a way, if you look at it objectively. Because yes, you may disagree with somebody's opinion, whether they're pro-abortion or not pro-abortion or whatever it is. But if they allow conversation about it, and they don't say, okay, you can be this side, but you can't be this side. I mean, that is a dictatorial organization, which nobody of any sound mind should even be a part of. That's the Liberal Party. That's the ruling party. The ruling party says anybody who runs in this party has to believe this side of the abortion debate. Otherwise, you can't be. That's China or something. That's like communist China. So anyway, I stand for free speech. And anybody and for freedom, anybody who's pointing in that direction, I'm not political, but if they are political and they're pointing in that direction compared to others, they're better. So anyway, and how does this improve the quality of our lives? Well, it helps us to be able to look at things, rationalize things, and come up with some thoughts, right? And going along with the mainstream is not thinking, as far as I'm concerned. So I think the PPC, if nothing else, will add a great degree of theater to the next election, and I look forward to it. Stevie here, Grand Great talking. We'll talk again soon. Please like, subscribe, and share. Bye-bye for now.